Hi everybody, this is Jason Warren from COM 125 Excelsior College, and you are getting ready to see my process speech on the simple process of brewing science. So sit right back here and let me show you a little bit about how to make beer. I'd like to ask my crowd if anybody knows the process or the history of making beer.
Yeah, well, being from New England, I know that George Washington liked the porter beer. What goes into the porter?
A porter beer has a lot of interesting history in that it dates back to actually the early 1700s, and George Washington called it his small beer, and I'm going to actually show you some of the grains that are used in making a small beer and why George Washington chose that particular beer style. So thank you for asking. So why don't you sit back and I'll tell you a little bit about brewing science. So the first thing that we need to look at in beer brewing is the various grains that we have available for you to brew beer with. Now, has anybody drank beer in this crowd?
No.
Oh, that's because we have a college crowd. This will be your job while you're in college is drinking beer. But I'm going to show you actually a little bit about drinking beer and making beer actually. So the first step in making beer is you have to have a solution of sugar so that the yeast can eat it and form alcohol, okay? Now, there are two different processes that we can do. One is called an all-grain process, and one is called a malt extract process. And I'm going to show you actually both of these, okay? So, looking from the left here, what we have is a light grain, okay? This is, if you want to liken this grain to flour in making bread, okay? This is your base product, okay? As we progress further down the line of grains, what we have are what they call specialty grains. And these grains are primarily geared for giving the beer color, mouthfeel, body, different types of alcohol percentages. And as you go through, we have different kinds like British, Scottish. This particular one is from from Germany. And we also have one here that is a rice malt. Now everyone's heard of a Japanese beer, Asahi, correct? Okay. Asahi makes their beers primarily with rice. Now what we have here is corn. Everyone's seen Corona, correct? The commercials for Corona. The commercials for Corona show that they're very light beer and they use a lot of corn malt. So these are the various malts. And by the way, this is not all the malts that we can use. There are hundreds of different ones, but these are kind of some of the base ones that go along with the different styles of beer that they make. Okay, when you put all these malts together and you formulate a recipe, what you have to do is you have to run the grains through what they call a malt mill, okay? And a malt mill is this right here. And what you do is you put the grains inside of a mill and you run them through a roller process. And what this does is this cracks the grains in half. And once you get all the grains cut in half, you put them into this product right here. This is called a mash tun, okay? It's German for mashing is the extraction process, okay? The water that goes into this bucket right here is called the sparge kettle. And a sparge kettle is German for rinsing, okay? So what we have is grain and water. So think of oatmeal and water. And you're putting this mixture in here. And what you're doing is, for an hour, you're extracting all of the carbohydrates and you're converting them into sugar. Okay? Any questions so far? Yes, ma'am.
Is it ready yet?
No, not yet. It's going to be ready as soon as we get through the brewing process and we actually ferment the beer, it'll be ready to drink. That's a very good question because I get that a lot while I teach people how to brew. Is they wonder if when I'm done brewing, is the beer ready to drink right now? And the answer is no. And we're going to actually show you the specific process of conversion of alcohol, and I'll get to that in just a second. Let's talk about hops. Okay, a lot of people hear the word hops, they see it in the General Nutrition Center, and what they don't know about hops is that hops is actually a vine, okay? Grows very well in the Pacific Northwest, and what you can do is take the hop cones from here and they make this wonderful little, it looks like rabbit food, but it's actually not rabbit food. It's condensed hops. And what we do is we take this mixture, we take it all into this process right here, okay? This is the boiling kettle, and from here we rinse the grain when we go into the boil. We boil the beer for 1 hour, and then we add hops at various stages of this process. Now, once we're done boiling the beer after an hour, we have to cool the beer very quickly. So the way that we do this is we run it through a cooling plate right here, okay? We run extremely hot liquid on one side, and we run very cold hosed tap water through the other side, and these various plates. Now, that process of heat exchange will take the beer from 220 or 212 degrees through this pump into the heat exchanger and put it into my fermenter at a very nice, comfortable 70 degrees. Now, why does it have to be cooled quickly? And I'll tell you in just 1 second. That is because yeast are very temperamental, different little creatures. Yeast, like bread yeast, there's brewer's yeast, and there's probably 200 to 300 different kinds of yeast, and they function very well between 50 and 80 degrees. Now, once I get the beer cooled and I put it into my fermenter, what I want to do is I want to take the yeast and introduce it into my cooled sugar water. And the reason why I want to do that is because there's a process that a lot of people are not aware of, and that is the alcohol conversion process. And if you'd like to come over here, I'll just show you real quickly. What we have is C6H12O6, or what most people know as sugar. We have yeast, and we have ethanol alcohol. Now, what happens is here you have sugar, and now you have yeast. Yeast love sugar, and once they eat that, the byproduct of this process is ethanol alcohol or beer. Okay? So when people say, is the beer ready? I say, not quite yet. There's a 14-day process that goes on where the fermentation goes on and the sugar is consumed and created into alcohol. So that's that. Okay. Are there any questions so far from the audience? No?
Is there any other advantage to letting it sit even longer than the 14 days?
Great question. In some cases, there is actually, and when you're making lager beers, you may have to ferment them for a longer period of time, such as like Japanese lagers. They may have to ferment for, say, 90 to 120 days to make them that really crisp, light flavor profile that you have. So that's a great question. Now, I'd like to get a lot of people saying, where do we go from here? You have beer in a fermenter. Where do we go? And the answer is we have to go into either a keg or a bottle. So what I have here is a bottle, and I'd like to show you real quickly. From here, I can go directly into a bottle phase, or I can go into a kegging phase from here. And either way, if you're going to go into a kegging phase, what you have to do is have a tap system like I have where you can dispense your beer, okay? Now, a lot of bottles are used primarily today to just, if people want to enter contests or if they just want to put them away for safe storing. But what you do is you put the beer in here, you take a cap that you can purchase from your local brew store, and you can put that on and cap that and put these away for a couple months and they'll be ready to drink. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about hangovers and how alcohol affects your body, because you'll need to know this one day. And your body requires an immense amount of water to digest and clear your body of alcohol. So there are two things that you could do to reduce the amount of hangover that you have the next morning from consuming beer, and that is take a lot of B vitamins. Yeast, brewer's yeast specifically, is a very high concentration of B vitamins. And a lot of people joke because they say, well, if you have this yeast and you introduce it to the beer, technically you have a lot of B vitamins, right? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So you'll want to make sure that you flush your body with a lot of water, take a lot of B vitamins if you can, and certainly get a lot of sleep. So, okay, so I've given you a very rough estimate on how to make beer. Of course, there's hours and hours more footage that you can get, but this is a very raw introduction to the process. Please email me if you have any questions, or shoot me an email on the message board on Excelsior College. Until then, cheers.